First of all, I was working in Los Angeles at a boatyard, and I was part of the hippie movement at the time. I guess you could say I would go to Sunset Boulevard, where all the hippies were on the weekends. And so what happened was, I had a 1956 Chevrolet at the time, and I was driving down Sunset Boulevard, and for the first time I saw the Hare Krishna devotees. There was a small group of men dressed in orange robes and women dressed in bright saris, and I really didn't know who they were or what they were about. But I remember I stopped and I just got out and said, whoever you people are, whatever you're doing, I feel that I have to do this. And so I got their card, and the card said, please visit the Hare Krishna temple on La Cienega Boulevard, and it had the Hare Krishna mantra on there. So they had a Sunday feast program advertised on the card, so I went to the temple on the first Sunday after that on La Cienega Boulevard. And the first thing I noticed in the temple was, I saw the altar, of course, but what really caught my attention was a giant painting of Lord Nrsingadev. There was a huge painting on the wall. So I asked some of the devotees there, what does this painting mean? And they said Lord Nrsingadev is the incarnation of God when he becomes angry. So he's a lion, half man incarnation. And I said, and who is the little boy with the garland, is the little boy at the feet of Lord Nrsingadev? They said, well, he was a devotee who was being attacked, and so this made God very angry, and so God manifested himself in this form of a half man, half lion. And it made a lot of sense to me. If God would become angry, this is the type of form he would take. A very scary looking lion who would be attacking, whatever was making him angry. This is an appropriate incarnation or manifestation of God if he was going to be angry. So it really made a lot of sense to me, and I just kind of sat there for quite a while looking at the picture. I was just kind of amazed by the whole thing. Now, what's interesting for me personally is that as my life in Krishna consciousness went on, by different problems, my life became endangered. There was different people who wanted to kill me, and I sort of took shelter of Lord Nrsingadev. And so it's ironic that was the first thing that really attracted me in the Hare Krishna religion, was the incarnation of Lord Nrsingadev, who protects his devotees. And as it turns out, I later on, as I developed in my Krishna career, I guess you could call it, I became very kind of dependent on Lord Nrsingadev and sort of meditated on him. But at the same time, while Lord Nrsingadev is a very fierce form of God, there are devotees who pray to Lord Nrsingadev that, my dear Lord, just like you killed the demons with your sharp nails, please kill the demon of my material desires in my heart. Please purify my heart. So Lord Nrsingadev is, on the one hand, this very ferocious looking figure. At the same time, the sincere devotees of God or of Krishna, they see the soft side of Lord Nrsingadev, that he's a very special incarnation who protects his devotees. And so they pray for his protection and pray that he will use his sharp nails to kill their material desires. And later on, I learned that in the story of Lord Nrsingadev, that his devotee Prahlad, the little boy who was standing at his feet, did not fear Lord Nrsingadev. So he just walked up and tried to give a flower garland to the Lord. But the demigods, who were also present, they were afraid. They were afraid to approach the Lord. So this showed me the difference between the materially contaminated devotees who are still tinged with some material desires. They could not approach Lord Nrsingadev, but the sincere devotees, they're not afraid of Lord Nrsingadev at all. So anyway, that was my first impression when I came to the temple in Los Angeles. I left thinking very much of the picture of Lord Nrsingadev, that is what stuck out in my mind, and it may be that that was something that I would need later on in my life, and so it was something that was given to me at that time. But I also remember seeing the ladies offering ghee wicks to the deities there and smelling the incense in the temple. So I was quite amazed by the whole scene, and I was very attracted. Immediately I just wanted to be part of this program. I said, this is what I need to do. And so they had a feast, and I sat down with all of the devotees. They served out the feast. And unfortunately, I talked to a devotee, well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I talked to a devotee who was named Kanu Priya. And I said, I really would like to join your temple. And he said, well, there's no room here. We don't have room in the temple. You can't stay here. So I was very disappointed, and I said, well, where's your nearest other temple? He says, well, we have one in San Francisco. So, as fate would have it, I decided to trek up to San Francisco and join the temple there, hoping that there would be room up there for me to stay at the temple. So that's what happened. I went to San Francisco and ended up staying at the temple there. Of course, there was no real room in the temple. It was just crowded. But devotees were sleeping in cars in front of the temple, and there was a parking lot behind the temple. The temple was on Frederick Street in San Francisco, and they were building the Rath Yatra cars at the time for the San Francisco Rath Yatra Festival. So they asked me to help with painting the carts. So I was out painting with a little paintbrush, painting little flowers and different designs on the bottom part of the cart. And I just remember how kind of chaotic it was putting these cars together. It was sort of like a lot of amateur carpenters and a lot of difficult personalities all combined together. So I was helping out, and there was one devotee there I remember very clearly, Narayan Das. He was one of the people building the cart, and I was down below painting, and all of a sudden the hammer dropped on the ground about a foot away from me, and in other words, it nearly missed my head. And I said something to him, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was like he wasn't at all concerned that I could have just been whacked over the head with a hammer. He basically started yelling at me. So I started to realize that the movement has some sort of conflicted personalities, and this might be a little bit of a problem as I move forward in the Hare Krishna religion. But I do remember everyone was very friendly to me, and I remember Jayananda, and Madhavisa Swami was there. He was in charge of the temple at the time, and they went out of their way to accommodate me and make me feel welcome there and make sure I had the resources that I needed and things like that. So it was a very nice atmosphere. The temple was just packed all the time. And well, it was at that time, that was the Haight-Ashbury hippie scene. Haight-Ashbury is not far from Frederick Street, so a lot of hippies were coming, and especially to the Sunday feast, the temple was just packed out. There would be a line of people outside waiting to come in and get a plate of prasadam. So it was quite a enlivening time, I think you would say, in the Krishna religion at that time. And we would have huge kirtans. We would have maybe 60, 70 devotees doing Harinam Sankirtan. We would go out and do kirtans around San Francisco. And I remember one time we were out, and this old lady just came up with her hands up in the air and her head up in the air, and she said, "The angels from heaven have come." So we were definitely a potent force at the time. People could just feel the potency of people chanting Hare Krishna, and the kirtans were very boisterous and loud, and there was, maybe 4 or 5 people playing madrunga drums, and maybe 20 people playing kartal, so it was very loud, and it was ecstatic, really, at that time. So I really liked those kirtans and looked forward to the times when we would all go out. We would pack up into a couple of vans and go to some part of the city and all pile out and start doing kirtans. So it was very nice. And then after I'd been there for a little while, Prabhupada appeared there. And I remember there was like a double Dutch door in front of the temple, which means it's like a half of a door and a top half and a bottom half. So the bottom half was closed because the temple was just packed. And I wasn't able to get inside because they just basically closed that bottom part of the door. But the top was open, so I could kind of lean over and look inside. So I leaned over and I saw Prabhupada sitting on his Vyasa seat, Vyasasana, and he was speaking. And it was very, very hard for me to understand what he was saying because I was so far away, but I was very attracted to Prabhupada personally, and I had read some of his books. I was reading his Bhagavatams, which he had brought from India, and some of the words were misspelled, some of the words were upside down. You know, he had this thing printed in India, but I felt great potency from those Bhagavatams, and I just loved the books that Prabhupada had written. And I also had a Bhagavad Gita, which at the time was the abridged edition. I think it was called the purple edition because it had like a purplish cover on it. So I had that. I read that over and over, and I was reading the Bhagavatams. So anyway, I in other words, I already had an idea of what Prabhupada was saying. You know, so I got a little discouraged just hanging over, not being able to hear. So I just went across the street, just kind of sat on the other side of the street, and then the door opened and Prabhupada walked out, and he looked over. It was just me sitting over on the other side of the street. And, you know, I was dressed, I think at the time, in an orange robe. I was dressed like a brahmachari. So Prabhupada just kind of looked over at me. And I looked back, and I think we kind of connected a certain level at that time. I felt very connected to Prabhupada, and I feel in my heart I accepted him as my guru at that time. So then I began to remember that, you know, they told me there was no room in Los Angeles, and somehow or other I ended up in San Francisco. So then I began to feel that it was actually a benediction that I had not been allowed to stay in Los Angeles, because that allowed me the opportunity to meet and see Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. Anyway, the Rath Yatra Festival was very ecstatic. There were many, many devotees, and a lot of the hippies joined in, so it was very crowded. But I remember the Hells Angels motorcycle club attacked one of the cars, and they tried to jump on top of one of the cars. But we had this big black person, I guess he was some sort of a devotee. He used to wear a really big red tilak. And he used to sit in the temple and he would ask, "What's my name?" And we would say, "Krishna Das." And he would say, "Krishna Das." I like that. So I think he was a little on the eccentric or maybe crazy side, but he had insisted on riding on top one of the cars, which turned out to be a good thing because he was a huge man, and he just started beating up on the Hells Angels. So he kind of defended the car from the attack of the Hells Angels. But anyway, it was at the time, you know, a very kind of fluid situation. There was devotees moving in and out of the temple, hippies coming in and out of the temple. There was basically a lot of chaos going on. But somehow or other, the movement was expanding. More and more people were interested. More people were joining. There was also a temple across the bay in Berkeley, and so I would sometimes drive across there and shuttle devotees from San Francisco over to Berkeley. And by the way, the Berkeley Temple still exists. The Frederick Street Temple was eventually closed, and right now it is a laundromat, but it still has those double Dutch doors. So I drive by there once in a while, and it's kind of a nostalgic place for me to go and see the 518 Frederick Street, what used to be the temple there. It's right near Golden Gate Park. Now later on, I became a little restless in the San Francisco temple situation. I felt it was a little chaotic, so I met somebody from back east, and they said, well, you should go back east. We have some smaller temples that are much simpler and much more organized, and you might fit in better over there. So I actually went all the way back to Buffalo, which was my hometown. I actually grew up in Buffalo, New York. There was a temple there run by Rupanuga Das. And there was, I don't know, maybe 10 people in the temple at the time. Tejas was there, Tejas Das. And a couple ladies were there. It was a pretty small scene, but we were doing little college programs. We went to the Buffalo State University, and we would set up a table there and distribute prasadam and distribute books. And we would do a little kirtan with our little ragtag group, maybe 10 people. It was very cold in Buffalo. It was like snowing and freezing, and we would still go out, with big coats on and long underwear on, and we would go out for hours and do kirtan, even in Buffalo. But what happened eventually, Prabhupada wrote a letter to all of the temples, and he asked if someone, if 2 people from each temple could go to India, would anybody volunteer to go? He wanted to start something in India. There was a few people there in India already, but not much of a operation. So anyway, I volunteered to go to India. So then, in order to go to India, I had to go to New York City to get my visa and get set up to go there, and also to collect the money for the airfare to fly to India. So I went to New York City and started selling books, and I was allowed to keep a certain amount of the profit of the sales so that I could collect for my airfare. And the New York Temple was another kind of similar to San Francisco, really. It was a fairly large building. It was much bigger than the San Francisco Temple, but it was kind of like a compact. It was in Brooklyn. It was one of these multi-story buildings where each floor is not actually that big. So, and there was a little roof, up on the roof where I was staying, there was a little patio out on the roof there. So I remember Gopal Krishna was there, and his wife, Ekayani, and a lot of the old New York devotees. Advaita was there. And we had very nice kirtans, big kirtans, maybe 40, 50 people would go out. We would go to Times Square, have big kirtans there. So it was, again, you can't really beat having that number of people. The big kirtans were just wonderful. And that's one of the things that attracted me to the movement in the first place. But anyway, so one thing I remember was there was a devotee named Hari Kesh there. Hari Kesh later became a big GBC leader in ISKCON. But he was convinced that there were ghosts on the top floor of the building in Brooklyn, so he was trying to, burn incense to get the ghosts out of there, and he was always, in a state of shock, watch out, the ghosts are going to make you jump off the building and stuff like that. I thought he was a little bit crazy. So, later on he became sort of like my nemesis, because he represented, some of the leaders who I felt had falsely taken over the ISKCON movement. But it's interesting that at the time, everybody in New York just considered him to be a little bit of a cuckoo individual without, too much of his brain glued together, because he was very eccentric. And Gopal Krishna who later also became a big leader, he was just like a bookkeeper. I think he had some job doing accounting or something like that. So these people had very humble positions at the time, and so I was kind of surprised later on when they took such, opulent positions as being gurus and things like that. But anyway, it was a very humble, very simple atmosphere in the New York Temple, and it was a very pure atmosphere, and everybody was working together. It was very centered on Prabhupada at the time, so that kind of kept everything glued together. There was personality differences and things like that, but the temples were able to function pretty well and stay pretty organized, and they were, continuing to make more devotees at the same time. Anyway, somehow or other, I finally collected together my fare to go to India, and I got some cheap cut rate ticket. So I flew to London on a jet, and then transferred from there to an old Russian turboprop plane, which was going to take me to Delhi, and this was a really noisy airplane, which worried me a little bit. And I remember landing in Moscow, and I was dressed like a devotee, and the police were just like following me around the airport. They thought I was a very suspicious character. Anyway, I finally landed in Delhi, and Prabhupada was there in Delhi at the time. So I went to, I don't think we had a temple, I can't remember now. I think we were staying at some rented place or something like that. But anyway, we were there in Delhi, and Jagadguru Swami was there. Let's see, Gargamuni, Brahmananda, Malati, Shamsundar, Guru Das, his wife was there. There was a small group. There was maybe, Madhavananda showed up later on, and maybe there was 20 people altogether. Srimati, one lady there. So we had a small group, and Subal Swami was there, and there was kind of Narnarayan was there. There was kind of a small group that was rotating around. People would kind of come and leave the group. You know, it wasn't like a stable group of people. So we had a little small party, and we were doing a program in Delhi. And shortly after being in Delhi, we all went to Vrindavan, and we started doing parikrams around Vrindavan with Prabhupada. Prabhupada was like acting as our tour guide. He was telling us this is a temple which belonged to the Goswamis, and this temple has this history and that history. And we went to Barshana, which is Radha's birthplace. We just traveled all around the area with Prabhupada leading us around. And so it was a very, very kind of ecstatic time to be personally guided around Vrindavan by Prabhupada. We went to the Damodar temple there, which was the place where he had stayed in Vrindavan, and we participated in the program there, and we would get up early and go to the Mangal Arti there, and so on and so forth. So it was quite a small scale, but very nicely organized program, basically because Prabhupada was holding the show together personally at the time. So he would have us meet in the morning, and he would see who was doing what, and he was kind of like managing the whole operation on a personal level. Who was going to do what today, who was going to go where today. And Tamal Krishna was there, and Giriraj was there. And Tamal had a wife named Madhuri, and I remember he kept hassling Prabhupada to take sannyas, and Prabhupada said, no, just stay with Madhuri and give her one child. And Prabhupada said, if you don't give her one child, she'll go mad, because if you give her a child, she'll have someone to meditate on, in your absence. But Tamal was very adamant and very insistent, and he just kept badgering Prabhupada over and over and over again. So finally Prabhupada gave him sannyas. Now sannyas means that he would be not living with his wife. So Madhuri started wearing white, and unfortunately Madhuri did have a lot of mental issues after that. She felt neglected and abandoned and all these kind of things. It did create a problem for her. So I would say that most of the devotees there were doing good service and getting along pretty well. We had Dinanath, who was doing the kirtans, and he was a great kirtan leader. Guru Das and Yamuna were eventually going to manage in Vrindavan. We started a center in Vrindavan. Guru Kripa showed up. He didn't really stay there long, but he did come a couple times, I think, while I was there. And he led his kind of Guru Kripa kirtans, which Prabhupada seemed to enjoy quite a bit. We had Brahmananda and his brother Gargamuni. They came and went a couple times. Madhavananda and his wife Kaushalya. Madhavisa was managing the Bombay temple, which was like an apartment that we had. Now what happened later, we all had to move out of that apartment when we moved to the Bombay property, where we're living in a tent. And Madhavisa didn't like that. He thought that was going to be too austere for the devotees, and so he kind of skipped out of town. I think he went to Australia at that time. But anyway, we had, Shamsundar was there. He was making these pandal programs where we would set up a tent, and then we would have like a platform, and then all kinds of people would be invited. Sometimes 10,000 people would come to hear our kirtans. So an important thing happened then. When we would get up to walk up to the platform, these old ladies, a lot of old ladies came to these programs, a lot of widows, And Prabhupada said, well, it's unfortunate, but the backbone of religion in India is the widows. But anyways, the widows were touching our feet, and Prabhupada said, this is very bad. You can't allow people to touch your feet. You have to touch their head back. Even if it's a woman, you have to touch their head back because you're taking their sins. You're acting as a guru by having them touch your feet. So this was a very important instruction that we got from Prabhupada at this time.